Well, I was born in Glossop, Derbyshire, but my parents actually lived in North Manchester, so that I didn't stay in Derbyshire very long, except that every school holiday I went there for to stay with my grandmother, really to get me out of Manchester. We lived very close to the centre of Manchester, and it was, you know, quite a busy area. I had a sister 3 years older than myself called Muriel. I went to school, to junior school, to church school straight across the road, and stayed there till I was 11. And then, while still in Manchester, I went to Harper Hay High School, and that was only for a year and a half, I think, before we moved to Whalley Range. We moved to Whalley Range in 1938, Christmas 1938. So that was, and I went to Whalley Range High School, as I said, and it was during that time that the war broke out. And I just had a birthday, August, and of course it was the 3rd of September, and we were called immediately to be evacuated, the whole school to be evacuated together. And together we all went to Stacksteads, which is between Bacup and Rossendale. And we were billeted. I was with a friend called Barbara Jones, and we were billeted in with a lady who had 4 sons, but 2 of them at home, in a 2-bedroomed house. So you can imagine it was quite tight. My friend and I had to sleep together in a 3-quarter bed with a curtain between us and the lady of the house, because the sons were in the other bedroom. It was very good in that she was a very nice lady, and her sons were a lot older than us. They were 18, 20, well, one of them was, they were working, and but they'd not been called up for the army at all, so that they played cards with us and things like that. But the lady was an excellent cook, and we always looked forward to Thursdays, because on Thursday she did her baking, and we had hot pot, and you know, with a big crust on top and apple pie, and we always looked forward to that. But it was a smaller house than I'd been used to, if you like, that everything happened in the kitchen. The sitting room was only used on Sundays, but we were allowed to do our homework there. We went to school at Rossendale Grammar School, and had to travel there every day, part-time, shared the school with their pupils. Alternate desks were locked up with our names on and their names on, so that you only used your own desk. Well, it was a reasonable time in that my parents were near enough to come and travel. They'd only just bought a car. They hadn't had a car when we lived in North Manchester, and they just bought one before the war, not realising there was going to be a war, but they were able to come and visit occasionally. So I think that really we were lucky people.
Yes.
But what happened was that we was near enough, and nothing had happened in the war. So we came home for Christmas. And it was during that time that we had the Manchester Blitz.
1940?
Yes, Christmas, 1940. we'd been an hour and a year and a half at Bake Up at Stacksteads. And that, the day of the Blitz, we were actually travelling. We'd visited my parents had visited a shop. They were looking after my cousin's shop because they'd set him up in business in Bake Up, not Bake Up, I beg your pardon, that's wrong, in near Northwich, Barnton, just outside Northwich. And so they were going to see, but he'd been called up for the Grenadier Guards. And so his wife with 2 young children was looking after the shop. So they went to see that everything was all right. So with my uncle. So they dropped off my sister and myself in Altrincham with my cousins whilst they went up to Barnton. And it was during that time that they heard that they were bombing Manchester, or the area, you know, Trafford Park, you see.
Yes.
We were very near Trafford Park. So they came rushing back, said, jump in the car, quick, we're going home. And we'd actually travelled through the bombers, through the raid. They were dropping bombs, sentry bombs particularly, all round us. We travelled down the Chester Road to Whalley Range. And it was during that time that whilst we were travelling, we got onto Withington Road where we lived. And they stopped us and they said, you can't go through. There are pipes and things across the road. And what had happened was that there were places all round us being bombed, but particularly the place opposite our shop where we lived was in flames. And we had to go down into a cellar that they'd made into an air raid shelter and sit there. And every time there was a pause in the bombing, my father used to come out and go to the shop and report what was happening, and things like, well, we've no windows in the house, everything's gone, you know, but it's still standing, even though the ballroom opposite wasn't. And things like, he was a very proud window dresser, my father. He was very artistic, and he had a huge doll in the middle of the window, and that was his treasure. And one time when he went to see, the doll had gone.
Oh dear.
But, you know, odd little things like that. So when the all clear went, we finally went back to the shop, and Father opened the shop, and people came pouring in, dressed in dressing gowns and whatever, and saying, you know, the house has gone, we can't go back, we've nowhere to go. And Mother was making cups of tea, and Father was giving them cigarettes and things like that, and you know, that till everything calmed down.
That was the Blitz.
That was the Blitz.
What happened after that?
We all refused to go back to being evacuated, and that's when we got this form that said we'd been good evacuees, you know. And they had to, there were so many of us wouldn't go back that they had to abandon the idea altogether and reopen our school. Now this happened all over Manchester. It wasn't just our school that people didn't want to go back. They felt that they wanted to be with their parents if anything was going to happen. And after all, we were grammar school children, we were 13, yes, you know, and older, so that we felt responsible. And they actually opened a school in, I think it was Milton Keynes. They opened a school where all the children from all over Manchester who hadn't been, who had come back, but whose parents didn't want them to stay at home.
Yes.
For various reasons. Obviously because they thought it was unsafe, but also because whilst their children away, they'd become occupied in something to do with the war.
Yes.
So that so that there was a special school open there that we didn't go to, of course. That was, you know, we just knew about it because I actually met later on after the war. No, still during the war, a friend who'd done that, I'd been in North Manchester with her and met her again at work. That was a period when I started work, and she'd been to this school down in Milton Keynes.
What? You sure it was Milton Keynes, down in Buckinghamshire?
Pardon?
In Buckinghamshire.
Yes.
Oh, right.
I think I've got the right place.
It may well be. At that time, it would have only been a village.
Well, that's it. It was a safe area.
Yes. It became a major housing area in the 70s, but that was something different. Yes, there was a small village called Milton Keynes there.
Well, I think it was
near Newport Pagnell, yes.
I may have, I mean, it's just...
No, it could well be.
I'm just going back in memory, obviously.
Yes, of course.
And I didn't go myself. The only way it affected us was that 2 teachers from each of the schools involved had to go there for a term to teach and then change, and another 2 would go. Yes. It was a way of because the school, I presume it wasn't you know, an original grammar school. They made the school there.
I doubt there would have been anything more than just a village school.
Possibly.
Think, yes.
I don't know. I can't.
Yes.
I don't know that. I only know that we lost teachers every now and again. Yeah. I can remember particularly that two PE teachers went together because they were friends. Yes. So they volunteered together to go. I think that was on a voluntary basis.
Yes.
And so for a whole term, we didn't have any PE in the school because our teachers had gone, you know.
Yes, yes.
But, well, I stayed at school until I took school certificate, yes. and then left. Took a job in the Ministry of Labour, actually.
What age were you then?
I'd be 16.
Right, so about 1942.
Yes.
Yes.
And so for a year and a half I worked in an office in Manchester, you know, Sunlight House in Manchester. Yes. We were there on the 6th floor. And, well, to be quite honest, I hated it. I hated being in a confined office. It wasn't me at all. And so I sort of talked it over with my parents, and they said, well, go back and talk to your headmistress at the school, yes. who was Dr. Arscott. And I went and talked to her. She said, well, you know, we talked over what I would like to do. And she said, I think you could make a good teacher.
Oh.
So she said, but you need to come back to school. So at the Christmas, I went back to school for 1 term and took 2 A-level, what would be the A-levels now, but they're not, higher education.
Yes, yes.
And I've got the certificates to show those. Just took 2 subjects, English and, no, I took maths and history, but I also repeated my English. Because she thought it would be good for me. And I've not got a certificate for that. I don't understand why not, but anyway, I did that, and I had to go for an interview. But the college I went to was Edge Hill, which is a Liverpool college, but was evacuated to Bingley in Yorkshire. So I had to go to Yorkshire for my interview. And obviously I was accepted. And the tutors there were all from the Liverpool college. And we shared the accommodation with the Bingley college. So again, this was all part-time, different things happening. And we did my friend and I were new friends I made, obviously. We did a lot of cycling in the area, and we did our teaching practices in that area at Bradford, and in specifically, I can't remember names of schools, obviously.
No.
But we did our teaching practices there. And it was whilst I was there, of course, that the war ended. Yes. The war in Europe ended. And my friend and I don't know whether this is relevant or not, but my friend and I decided we wanted to go to York, to York Minster. We both felt somehow that would be a highlight at the end of the war. And so we set off on our bikes. We got as far as Tadcaster, and it was pouring with rain. So we decided that it wasn't on, that we'd arrive at York Minster wet through, and it wouldn't be, it was a bit silly. So we turned back and went back, and we joined what was happening in the college itself, of course, because there were celebrations there.
Yes, yes.
So that was the end of of course, the college went back to Edge Hill.
Yes.
Because before the war, they'd built a new college in Ormskirk. And the army had occupied it. But after the war, they vacated it. It had become a hospital. And so they did it up a bit, and we went back there. And, it was still in a bit of state of disrepair because of the reorganisation, etc.
Yes.
And so I finished my education there, and got my and did actually a teaching practice in Liverpool that year, and then came home and got a teaching job in Manchester. First of all, in Manchester, in Hume.
Yes.
Was my first teaching post, and then I moved from Hume to Lostock, near Stretford. And of course all this is after the war.
I mean, I don't know what Hume was like in those days.
Well,
Lostock fairly run down, I think, isn't it?
Well, Lostock wasn't run down then. Lostock was quite good. But Hume was a very poor area.
Yes.
I mean, there were odd little things like, odd things you remember, like a child who came to school and the teacher was worried about her and said she'd got her hair all tied up, she'd very long hair, told her to take her hair down, and she did, and it was crawling.
Oh dear, yes.
And another child, he hurt himself. He hurt his leg, and he had Wellingtons on. And when you couldn't take his Wellingtons off, and we said, the headmistress said, well, what do you do at night when you go to bed? Oh, I don't take them off. He slept, they just had one bed, and he slept under the bed. And so that sort of thing did happen. On the other hand, it was a good school. The children were taught well, you know. It was only it was a little Church of England school.
Yes.
Called St Mary's, I think it was.
Is it still there?
I don't know. I doubt it. I doubt it.
There are quite a number of schools around that area, right?
Yes, no, I think it will have gone. I mean, the only toilets were outside, and people had to go through, and we had open fires. That was the heating, you know, like a proper coal fire.
Yes.
We had those in the classrooms, because I used to. It was behind me, and I used to have to stand in front of this fire to teach the children. And the children who wanted to go to the toilet from the other classes had to pass through to get out. That was the open door, you know.
Yes.
So, but this is post-war, of course.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Let's just go back to pre-war,
yes.
or just talking about your parents for a second.
Yes.
I think you told me that your father was in the First World War.
Yes. He was with the horses. I don't know what regiment. I've no records, because he after my mother died, he remarried, and so a lot of his stuff was left there, and so I think my sister perhaps took some.
Yes.
But he used to talk about he had a team of horses. He'd been brought up in the country, you see. He'd been brought up in Glossop in Derbyshire. And he himself had a shop there and used to drive into Manchester in a team with a horse and cart,
yes.
to get his goods for the shop that he had in Glossop. And so he was used to horses. So they put him in. In fact, the war horse, reminded me so much of what my father had said.
Yes.
He said that if they were pulling a gun with a team of horses, and one of them slipped in the mud, you used to have to cut it off and let it go, because otherwise it would have pulled
the whole lot. Yes.
The other horses and the guns and everything would have gone, you see. But he was on the Somme, and
yes.
You know, I can't really tell you anymore.
He came back safely?
He came back safely.
And not gassed or anything like that?
Not gassed, no. Yes. I had uncles who were gassed.
Yes.
But he wasn't. No. No.
One of the lucky ones in a way.
He was,
although
indeed.
I don't know if it really was lucky.
Indeed, yes, yes.
Subjected to that experience.
That's
anyway.
Right, that's right.
During the Second World War, what did he do?
What did he do?
Yes.
He was a newsagent.
Yes.
We had a newsagent shop, sweets and tobacconist. So he was, of course, my mother was there as well.
Yes.
And the only contribution really to the war was, you know, in the Home Guard, fire watching and, you know, standing on the tops of buildings and things like that, which he used to do. After we'd closed the shop, he'd be called up to go and do that.
Yes.
But also my sister, who was 3 years older than me, towards the end of the war, she did that sort of thing too.
Everyone doing their thing and making the effort.
Yes,
yes, indeed. So, after the war, you're now a teacher?
Yes.
Was there any sort of legacy for you as a result of the war? Would you say, were there things that happened during the war that might have affected your ongoing life? Or were you lucky enough really to be able to sail through?
Enough.
Yes.
Yes, I don't think no. No.
So you went on and you married and...
Yes, I married in... whilst I was teaching at Lostock,
Yes.
I met my husband, and so we were married in Stretford.
Yes.
In St Matthew's Church, Stretford.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd come home. He was home, of course, when I met him.
Mm.
And he became an accountant. But, the war had affected his training for the good, strangely enough.
Really?
Yes, because he'd lived in Salford in a very... His father had been a crane driver, and he'd got sleeper sickness from the docks.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were quite poor. And so he left school at 14 and started work. But he always went to night school.
Mm-hmm.
Kept up with his education as far as he could. And when he was dismissed from the army, they went to... his father died, so they let him out of the army, if you like, a little bit earlier than he would have done. I called it dismissed. That's the wrong word, isn't it?
Yes.
What's the word I want?
I can't say released, because it's not really that either, is it?
No.
Let out of the army, let's say. Yes.
Anyway, there's a word, isn't there?
Yes.
And he went to that school. There was a place in... there's a stately home where a lot of the army took over.
Oh, yes.
And they went there for education after the war. And when he came back, he had a job with Sassoons, the export people.
Yes.
And that was he was working there when I met him, with them. And he decided to go to the university and see what was available to sort of better himself. And he discovered that he'd already passed some of the accountancy exams with the army, the first layer. And so he was able to come in at that level.
Yes.
And do his accountancy exams. And eventually he qualified as not a chartered accountant, custom works accountant.
Yes.
Because he was working while at hand. So...
And, I mean, you say he'd been in the army. What
Yes.
was he doing in the army?
Driving tanks.
Oh, right. So he was with the tank regiment?
Yes.
Right. What year was your your husband born then?
He was 4 years older than me. So
born 1922?
Yes, yes.
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 And so he must have seen quite a bit of what was going on possibly in North Africa and in northern France and so on.
No, he went across, D+3.
Yes.
He went across then.
Right, so that was after the 6th of June.
Yes.
Yes. And then presumably he went on up the French coast, did he?
That's right, he was driving he was in a tank. They went across with a tank and had to land with it,
Golly.
Yes.
I mean, some of those tanks had essentially were turned into water tanks with a skirt all around them so that they would float.
I'm sorry, I don't know any details. I just knew that he landed, and after the war, after the children were born, when they were old enough to understand, you perhaps remember this. He took us all there, and they built Mulberry Harbour.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes, indeed. Yes.
Yes. Well, he drove his tanks drove along on the Mulberry Harbour
Yes.
to get onto the French shore. They'd put it
Yes.
up in the 3 days.
It's quite remarkable. It
Yes.
was built by a British contractor who's still going to this day.
Really?
Yes,
Yes.
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 Not all. Yeah.
Well, they sank ships, didn't they?
They
to
did,
make
but they
it.
also towed across concrete structures.
Oh, well, I don't think
yes.
he was. I think that would be later.
Possibly, yes.
I think in his time it was just, you know, the ships sunk and they drove
Yes.
them across and landed on the French shore. Yes.
Yes. Are there other things that in your memory that you would like to talk about that you think might be relevant to sort of experiences you've had, perhaps during the... I mean, we have not talked about things like rationing. Now,
No, well, when I was working, we used to go to a British restaurant that had opened.
Yes.
Because you could get a meal for £1 in the British restaurant.
Was that in Manchester?
In Manchester, yes. In Hume it was. No, it wouldn't be Hume. It was on the main road coming out of Manchester. You know, where I worked, Sunlight House was on Deansgate, wasn't it?
Yes.
Well, it was from there coming in, so to be towards Stretford.
There was the Stretford Road.
Yes. Well, it must have been on there somewhere.
Because the Stretford Road today goes across the Princess Highway, across a bridge, but I believe that the city end of the Stretford Road, there was a large department store. I can't remember the name of it.
Holden's?
Yes.
Holden's.
Yes, Poland.
Oh, yes.
So I just wondered whether it was somewhere near there.
Well, it could have been, yes. 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 I just knew we found it very convenient. As far as rationing was concerned during the war, really, I suppose my parents dealt with it.
Yes.
Or, you know, it was, but we were certainly reasonably fed. And as I told you, we lived in a shop and
Yes.
sold cigarettes, things like that.
Yes.
And I can remember driving into Derbyshire, my father drove us to visit some relatives who had a farm, and coming back with a chicken and eggs.
Yes.
And he'd taken them some cigarettes, you know.
Sort of gentle bartering going
That's
on
right.
there. Yes.
I think quite a lot of that went on.
I bet. Yes, it would have done. Yes.
Yes.
So you didn't have chickens in your back garden or anything like that?
Oh, no, we didn't. I think parents were too busy in the shop.
In the shop.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of people have said to me that actually the rationing did them some good and might well have been responsible. This is a legacy thing.
For
really.
our old age now.
That's right.
Could have been.
Because
yes.
Because
Yes.
I know that certainly with WarGen,
Yes.
the number of people I meet of a senior age who are looking pretty good
Yes.
is quite remarkable.
Yes, yes.
All,
But you see, it also taught us to eat up.
yes.
We would never leave anything on the plate.
No wastage.
No, you don't.
We took what we could eat and we ate it.
Yes.
You know. But well, I think we lived sparsely but well, you know.
Yes. Yes.
We reasonably well.
And a lot of that's down to management, isn't it?
Yes, yes. Yes, my mother was a good cook.
Yes.
Yes, she was.
Yes. You would have had rationing things yourself. For instance, fruit. Did you ever see any fruit? Things like
No.
oranges or bananas?
No. I can remember the end of the war. I can remember my father taking me into Manchester to the green grocery area and seeing bananas for the first time. I can remember that.
Yes.
And so he bought us all a banana. But
No, because
Yes.
you would have had
you see,
a grass.
we were within. We lived on. No, I'm going. You see, I'm going back before the war. When we lived on Rossendale Road and we could go into Manchester so easily. No, we didn't. But I can remember Father taking us into Manchester. But the buses, there were good buses in those days. We probably went on the bus.
Yes, the buses,
Yes.
Trams also?
Trams when I was younger on Rossendale Road.
Yes.
They used to pass. In fact, they used to stop at the door.
That's convenient.
Yes, very convenient.
Yes.
You could just put your hand up and he'd stop.
So during the war,
Yes.
you used buses or did you walk? A bit of both, I suppose. Bicycling?
Bicycles. Bicycles.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yes.
So, are there other things that you feel you'd like to raise, to talk about? You after you married, you had family.
Yes. Yes. I've three children
Yes.
who all did well. They all went to university.
Yes.
And they're all married.
Yes.
And have children themselves. So they've each got 2 children themselves. Who all, I'm very proud of my family, let's put it that way. My husband would have been.
Yes.
Unfortunately, he died in 79.
Yes.
But it was probably a legacy of the war. He had a fibrillating heart.
Oh, right, yes.
Which they'd been A1 in the army, of course. And then it was shortly after we married. And he said he ought to have some insurance. It was whilst I was expecting my elder daughter. And he thought we ought to have some insurance. And so he went to see a doctor for the first time, really. And next thing we knew, he was in hospital. I got a phone call to say he was in hospital, and they discovered this fibrillating heart.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's not something that's easily cured either.
Well, it never was cured.
No.
He was always active.
Yes.
He used to climb a hill. We did a lot of country walking.
Yes.
And he'd be climbing the hill with my older daughter. They were very good walkers, and I'd be saying, "Hey, wait for me!"
Knowing what you know and what you've been through during your life, and thinking about the youngsters in the today and in the future, what advice would you give to them to lead a happy, successful life?
It's a difficult question, that,
It
because
is.
I think they are all happy
Yes.
and successful. As I say, I'm very proud of my family.
Yes.
And the youngsters are doing well. In fact, Fiona's daughter's just gone to Cambridge. And, they're all, her 2 children are at university.
Yes.
The others have all passed, got their degrees and are working. So be happy.
Excellent.
Be happy.
Yes, be happy. Yeah,
Be
absolutely.
happy.
And be positive,
Yes,
of course.
yes.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
Dorothy, thank you very much indeed for being prepared to be interviewed for War Gen.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.